Real people, real opinions.
Real Talk Radio. The multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic hits.
Kate Elysia, and she is a survivor of gang grooming. Kate was 18 years of age at college when the sexual abuse started, and it changed her life forever. And in her book, No Way Out, which is the title they've given it at the moment, but I believe they're re-looking at the title because it hasn't been published yet, she says that of her rapists, they degraded me to the point where I'd become this sex thing, this thing that wasn't human, but just an object. Kate believes we do not hear enough about the issue of trafficking of girls and also about women who are over the age of 18. We do hear a lot, I suppose, and we want to protect children and minors, but we don't hear enough about women who are taken advantage of, 18-year-olds who are taken advantage of in these situations. And she joins me on the line, Kate Elysia. Kate, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening.
And thank you very much for having me, Niall. So thank you for inviting me on the show.
Now, I know that you've courageously helped the police with Operation Chalice, which is a groundbreaking investigation into Asian grooming gangs. But where did it start for you? I mean, at what age were you when you met these people first and when it all started?
Okay. So I was 18. I was doing my A levels at college. So the college that I was at was in a town called Wellington in Telford, and I moved out to the YMCA. So I moved out from my parents' house to the YMCA because there was a YMCA building for young people in just around the corner from my college.
Yeah.
So the YMCA houses all genders of young people. So not just I know the title says Young Men's Association, but it was for girls and
kind
boys.
Of unisex nowadays, yeah.
Yeah, and it was for disadvantaged young people, so between the age of 16 and 25, although there was no one under 18 at the time I was living there. And so what had really happened to me is I was living at my mum's with my brother and sister, and my mum ended up with a new boyfriend who she moved in. He wasn't very nice, and he didn't really like us being in the house. So when I turned 18, they wanted me to move out. So I moved out while I was still at college.
So you kind of felt you weren't wanted there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was so I was kind of pushed out of the family, and at the time, that it happened, I didn't mind. I think I was a bit defiant, and I was like, I can live on my own. I'm fine.
Anyway, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, and the first month in the YMCA, so everything was fine. I was sort of getting on with college work, and it was coming up to, so it was May, so it was coming up to my final A-level exams, and I'd been there a month, and I'd seen some of the dodgy characters around, but I didn't really accept them as dodgy. So, because the town that I lived in was very quiet, very nice. It was not a big city. You wouldn't think that there was a gang living on that road. So I'd seen them around, but I didn't really know any of them. And there was one person they were talking about who was coming out of prison, and basically what happened is I didn't even know him, but he turned up at my door one day and broke in and raped me. So I'd only actually been there for a month when it happened. So
how old was he?
He was only a year older than me.
Okay.
But then there were older men after that.
Yeah.
So him and his cousin and another family member of his, they were the three catalysts in part of it. So Operation Chalice, I think they saw nine men, and there were two brothers. Well, I didn't know those
Yeah.
brothers, but they only lived the road opposite. So if I'd have stayed there any longer, I probably would have ended up meeting them. But luckily, I didn't have to meet them. So even though some of these horrendous things have happened to me, I still count myself lucky that it wasn't worse than it was, because I feel that it was for some of the younger girls who
Yeah.
were around at the time, who were also victims of the same gang.
I was going to say they were obviously notorious, and they were doing this to many girls, young girls, taking
Yeah.
advantage of young girls and grooming young girls
Yeah,
in that situation.
Yeah, well, so I reported it the first time, and I ended up having to report it again later on. But one of the men I reported, who was also convicted, his name was Muhammad Ali Sultan. He's been convicted of multiple victims now. So he's I think
Yeah.
four. I think there's been 4 other convictions for him, and that's just the people who have managed to secure convictions, not representative of the amount of children that he actually raped. So most of them were underage. Sorry, I think it was
Many
only me
wouldn't have
that was
reported it.
18. Yeah, so I think many didn't report it and hadn't reported it. But there's 4 that he's been found guilty of now. So.
It must be
I
quite
don't actually know.
difficult for you when you went to report it at the time, because, as you said, it was a small town, and it would have been difficult for you even to do that, and to come to terms with that as well. That must have been quite difficult for you.
Yeah, I reported the first. I reported the first rape. So when the first one, his name was Shabir, when he broke in and raped me, I was very clear in my mind at the time that it was rape, even though I was umming and ahhing about it, what I should do about it, and I had second thoughts, and I didn't know. I had some idea at the time that I'd been raped, so I went to the police, and I went to the police probably about 3 days later, because I'd been in a state of shock for the first 3 days after following the rape, and the police weren't as I would have expected them to be. I don't know what I expected, because I was only 18 anyway, but they were discouraging me from reporting it and as rape. And in the end, I just wrote a state, or they wrote a statement
Why were
for
they
me
why
saying
were they
it's
discouraging you from reporting it? Why do you think they were discouraging you?
So I think they were discouraging me because they felt that it was very they know the reputation of rape reports, and most of it doesn't make it to court at the time. I think actually the statistics are a bit better now, but at the time, rape was underreported and under prosecuted. So we were
like
like
5% or something end up in prosecutions. Yeah, it's a very small amount at the time, probably.
Yeah, and that's for today's statistics. So back then it was even worse. We're talking about 15 years ago now.
Yeah. That must have
16
been quite
years ago.
discouraging for you then, that you had kind of built up this bravery to go along and talk to the authorities and fight your accuser, or this predator, and to be told or discouraged, from doing it. That must have been even more difficult for you than after going and being brave enough to do that.
It was really, and I think it confused me as well, and I think it added to the grooming process that I was already well underway of receiving, which was that it wasn't rape, and that it was my fault, and that it was my problem, and that it was something that I had to deal with. And I don't think the police intended to do that, but because everyone around me was somehow blaming me for it, then it became in my mind my responsibility to do something about, or suffer with, the consequences of my behaviour or my actions. So I felt it was. I ended up feeling like that was consensual, and then because I was so clear in my mind that that was rape, then the other times which were more blurry because I'd been pushed into it, or I'd been coerced into it, or I'd been pressured until I'd given up, that I thought was consensual. So then I thought that the rapes following that were definitely my fault, because this time I didn't put up as much of a fight because I'd been raped already, so I was scared, so I didn't put up a fight. So that means that I regret this, but I consented to it, and I couldn't, in my mind, I couldn't understand why I kept doing this to myself. And
you
those
mentioned that, of course, that you
Yeah.
became this sex. You felt you became this sex thing, or the sex object, I suppose, or that you felt subhuman in some way.
Yeah, and that is what it feels like. It just consumes you. It becomes your life. They consume you because they are harassing you all the time, and that's what harassment does. It sort of bogs you down until you're in this very negative, inferior, like feelings of inferiority. It's like a delusional almost, that you're worthless and that you literally deserve this. And
what was
this
your
is your life
relationship with these individuals that were taking advantage of you, that were pressuring you, that were raping you? What was your relationship like with them? Were they, when you say they were grooming, and they did groom other girls as well, like, what do they do? And we talked about Pat's here a while ago about children in situations, I say children, teenagers, 16, 17 years of age, who are in state care, and there are gangs who will go to, the homes that they're in, and they will bring them shopping. This is what we heard about 2 or 3 weeks ago, which was horrendous. And they'll buy them a handbag, or they'll buy them jewellery. And these girls are too young to make any decisions around sex. But this is what they're doing, and they're bringing them to hotels. And that's how they're grooming these young girls, these vulnerable young girls who are in a very vulnerable situation. I mean, what was your relationship with these men? What were they offering anything in return for what they were doing to you, or was it just abuse?
So for me, there wasn't that much. I don't know what you would call it, sort of petting, grooming, in the way that they would give me gifts. At the most, they might give me the last bit of their spliff or something, which is something that I bargained with sometimes, because if I wasn't getting anything anyway out of it, then I would, at least, if they offered me something, I would take it. But they had younger girls around them all the time, and when I finally figured this out, and when I finally realised that they were doing it to other girls as well, it did make me realise that a lot of the younger girls that were around me were also being abused. And it was really hard to accept that. They would shower them with gifts. They would treat them like they were their girlfriend. I knew several of the guys who had very young girlfriends that were like 13 years old or 15 years old. I met a 15-year-old that they knocked on my door in the middle of the night and sort of dumped her on me, and I just wanted to get her away from them, so I just accepted her, because they obviously were trying to. Now I know they were keeping her from her parents, and that her parents were probably worried sick for the night. This wasn't the only occurrence, but at least for that one night, I knew she was safe, because I was going to keep her safe. That's a horrible thing to remember now, because she was so young and she was so vulnerable. And I remember asking her the question, "Are you sleeping with them?" And she was. And, it's just heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to remember. Yeah.
And you just want to try and protect them then. You just want to try and wrap them up and protect them, and there's not a lot you can do, because you just know that she's going back to them again, which that's heartbreaking to even think about that.
Yeah, yeah. And if I hadn't have been a victim myself, and I'd been older like I am now, then it would, I still hold a bit of guilt for not doing more for her. even though I have to remind myself, I was a victim at the time and I was very young. And that's one of the reasons that I like to try and speak out now, is that I want to help those girls who were in that position that I couldn't help at the time, and just let them know that there is someone out there who has been through it, and this is how I got out of it.
The men, by the way, that were doing this, obviously, they were rapists and clearly deserved to go to jail for a long, long time. Were they violent as well as being obviously rapists? And by the way, I'm not minimising the crime of rape. Of course, it's a violent crime in itself. But were they violent? I mean, if people didn't do what they asked or comply essentially with them or consent with them, were they violent?
They were very verbally aggressive towards me and threatening. So I would, if I tried to say no, there would be a fight, or there would be the suggestion of a fight. So sometimes I would, at the beginning, I was putting up more of a fight than towards the end, because towards the end I'd given up. I was there for about 4 months before I made my first escape, and by the end of the 4 months I was mentally and physically exhausted from trying to argue with them. But at the beginning I was a bit more trying to stand up for myself, and they would use physical threats to scare me, and because I knew they would win, then I would end up giving up, because I couldn't hope to win against a grown man when I was just an 18-year-old girl who had no experience in fighting at all, especially not trying to fight a grown man. So they would stand at my, because they knew where I lived, and they would stand at my door and they would verbally push their way into my house.
Yeah.
And I had no way of physically preventing them getting past me, or keeping them out and closing the door once I'd opened it. And I blamed myself a lot for opening the door when somebody knocked on the door. So I would do all sorts of things, like I put a note on the back on my door to say, "Don't open the door," just to try and remind myself, because I was answering the door on autopilot because I was scared.
Yeah.
But the danger is on the other side of the door. So if I keep the door shut and locked, then they can't get in. So there's no physical danger on the inside. So I can be as scared of them as I like. But as soon as I let them in, then the danger's there. So I had to do things to stop myself opening the door, because I would answer it out of fear automatically, and then regret it later, and then think, why did I open the door? And people would tell me off for opening the door. So I had to, that's another way of blaming myself.
It's very easy for somebody else on the outside looking in, telling you what you should and shouldn't have done. That's really easy. And I know during that period of time as well, you talk about the fact that you had considered even taking your own life. That's how bad things had got. I mean, you must have been on such a downward spiral at that stage.
Yeah, I honestly couldn't see any other way out. And because I felt so like this was my life now, like I felt after I'd been raped, I just thought my self-respect and my dignity was just ruined, my self-worth was ruined, and I would be worth nothing to anybody else either, and no one would be able to love me after I'd been raped. And I just couldn't see any way of coming back from that. And the only way out I could see was to either end my own life, was basically to end my own life. And the only thing stopping me at the time from making an attempt was I was thinking about, if somebody's made me feel this way and I'm going to die because of it, maybe I could take some of them down with me. So that was probably a little bit of my sense of humour coming through as well. Like, I'm not going to go down without a fight. Like, if I'm going to kill myself because of this, I might as well go on a murderous rampage. Yeah, which of course I was never going to do, because I'm not that kind of person.
I wouldn't blame you thinking like that. Everybody would be in the same boat thinking like that. I mean, these gangs, are notorious. And by the way, I'm so sorry to hear the life that you've had and what you went through with these individuals. Every single one of them deserves to be in jail with the key thrown away. But these gangs, I mean, as I said already at the start, you are helping. You've helped the police with Operation Chalice, which was a groundbreaking investigation into the Asian grooming gangs. But of course, that phenomenon of grooming gangs has been investigated before. We all know about Rochdale and Rotherham, and more recently Telford. Is the problem getting any better in the UK? Because, and by the way, it's happening here too, but not to the extent, obviously, because of the bigger population. It's happening in the UK. Is it getting any better? Are the police getting on top of these gangs?
I think it's really difficult to say, because I think that the police are I think there's more awareness now, and I think there's more awareness in young girls now, and I think that and within the services. So people hopefully young people have got more of a voice, I hope, to speak out. They've got more of an avenue to try and tell somebody that this is going on. It's easier to say because we didn't know what grooming was at the time, so we wouldn't have even been able to pick up those signs. I think some police forces are doing a lot more than previously they have, but I also think that other police forces in different areas are not trying as hard as they could. I think some of the attitudes are still there that were there before, about the girls being choosing it as a lifestyle.
Particularly in older
I
girls,
think,
say, for example, at 18. And this is the point you were trying to make is, when we think of grooming and we think of these gangs of grooming and, the rape of young women, so to speak, we always think of 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds. We don't think of somebody who's 18 years of age, and we say to ourselves, oh, well, surely at 18 they can look after themselves. But if you're a vulnerable person in a vulnerable situation and you see no other way out, you can become a victim of these individuals very easily.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to become a victim than you might believe. I think there's certain safeguards that some people have that actually protects them from this world so that they never have to become a victim. So things like having enough money to have, I don't know, a Ring doorbell outside your house so that you can see who's coming and going.
Yeah.
If you've got the luxury of having Wi-Fi, and people don't think about those as luxuries. They're just standard things, because if you're a working person, you can usually afford that. But when you're 18 and you're still working at McDonald's because you haven't got your qualifications yet, then you're a lot worse off. And people they don't give you the respect. If you work at McDonald's, you don't get the same level of sorry everyone who works at McDonald's, but you don't get the same level of respect in a lower paid job as somebody does who's working I don't know, as a doctor or something like that, so they're well protected up there, with their even just in your employment, you're protected. Like, I was working at Primark while I was being abused, and Primark would never have noticed, or never spoke to anybody at Primark about it, but I would have to walk through the town centre to get the bus back home or get the train back home, and sometimes I would literally get followed. I'd get followed on the way to work by them. One time, I was raped on the way to work because my neighbour had told them that I was at the train station, so they came to get me at the train station, and she texted me a heads up and said, I've had to tell them that you're at the train station. So I was trying to hide, and I was hiding in the wrong place because they came on the other platform, and so they saw me from across the platform anyway. So, and
I can't imagine what that, when you're standing there or you're hiding and you see them. And how many of them would there have been when, say, in that situation in the train station? How many of them was there?
Well, there was only two of them at that particular time, but it was one of the ringleaders. So there was three men that I couldn't escape from, and what would happen is sometimes if some stranger came up to me, the thing is they'd have heard about me, so they had been sent to find me. They knew who I was, so and they were part of the gang, but they were strangers to me. So I could get rid of a stranger quite easily just by, telling them to shove off and go away. But if they, what would happen is they would come back with one of the three main guys, and then I would have to do it. So sometimes I'd have a victory and then a loss, and then
Yeah, I know, and I'm so sorry. And how are you now, by the way, 15 years later? How do you? I mean, look, you're always going to be a survivor, and it's something that will never leave your mind. It's like a life sentence because of that part of your life. But how are you now?
Well, I'm actually very good now, and that's one of the reasons one of the things that I want to try and put across to other girls is that there is hope. So, if this is if this stops you from committing suicide when you're at your lowest, then I just want people to know that it does get better eventually. So I never thought that I would make it to the age of 30. I thought I'd be dead well before then. So when I was sort of 20, 21, 22, I could never imagine getting to the age of 30 because I thought I would either kill myself or I would die in the lifestyle I was living because it was so dangerous. I had too many sort of close calls. Or I would die so I would, either one of them would kill me by accident or something, or I might die from a drug overdose because I was doing drugs and alcohol and, I was doing all these things that could end my life quite easily. So I really didn't think that I would make it to 30. So when I got to 30, it was a bit of a pivotal turning point for me because I was like, I actually made it. That was a bit exciting. So my 30th birthday was a bit like, I'm actually still alive. I feel like this is actually something worth celebrating. And I think you never feel like an adult either until finally you get to 30 and you think, well, I still feel exactly the same way as I did when I was 18, but I must be an adult by now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Well and truly. And the advice you would give if somebody was listening and they happen to be in that situation where they feel they're being taken advantage of by a group of men or a man in that situation, and and they feel like there's no way out, similar to the way you felt, what advice would you give them if they were in that situation?
The advice I would give is to keep trying to get out, because you will. If you keep trying, you will get out eventually. Keep trying to tell somebody. Keep trying to tell the authorities, tell the police, tell social services, talk to your social workers, try and talk to your parents. Just do whatever you can. If none of that works, just keep trying independently to get out of the situation that you're in, and look for ways out in wherever you can find them, because there is a way out. And when you get out, it's worth it. It is worth it eventually. Sometimes, even after 3 years after the first time I was raped, I thought, for goodness sake, that's when I did actually try to take my own life 3 years later. And one thing that was going through my mind is I've been hoping to feel better for the last 3 years, and I haven't. I've wished I was dead for the last 3 years. So nothing is ever going to get any better. And that was a reason that went towards me making an attempt on my life. Sometimes we do have to wait longer than 3 years, and unfortunately, and I know that's horrible, but it is. But I just can't stress it enough that once over time, keep trying, you will get out. It can be slow, but it is worth it when you get there, because now I'm happy that I'm not dead, and I never would have got here if I'd have died when I was 20, when I took my first overdose. So it really is worth hanging on for.
What's life like now for Kate?
So I've qualified at university. I've been a nurse now for 11 years. When I first qualified, I was still vulnerable. When I qualified, I think, when I was 21 or 22, I was still sometimes being abused at that point. Over time, you get more confident and you build up life experience, and that gives you more confidence because when you've been doing something over and over, you get better at it just by default. And so
do you end
now
up,
I've been
do you
a
end up
nurse
having
for-
to move far away? Like, is it good advice maybe to move as far away as possible from that bad environment and those individuals and start a new life, essentially?
So I would say that it is really up to the individual whether they want to move away or not, because I feel that moving away helped me, and I've stayed well away for 15 years. And but one thing I would say that was a negative of that is that I have a habit of running away from situations now. So and I've had to work on that in counselling. Like when there's an incident at work, or if I have an argument at work, I don't have to leave my job because of an argument. If I stay on, then I can work things through and things blow over, and then work gets easier for you. But to begin with, I was job hopping a lot because I just would have a bad day at work and then that would be it. I didn't want to be there anymore. I thought that was over. Yeah, so I would run away. And,
because you had kind of learned that's how you deal with situations. You run away.
Exactly, yeah. And it worked. It worked for me. And you get confident at it as well because you're like, well, I've run away before. I can do it again. I can move somewhere new and I can start. Again. I know how to get a deposit on a flat somewhere, and I've got all these little skills that you learn along the way of how to pack your bags quickly and move out. And I don't always think that's the best thing to do. Although when I was actually being abused, if they're surrounding you and you can't escape, and they might follow you somewhere, if you move to somewhere else in the same town and they found you, then sometimes it is worth moving a long way away where they won't bother to, where it's not financially, isn't
unfortunately
time consuming for them to come and get you. So
we still hear about these gangs on a regular basis in the newspapers. They seem to work in large numbers, obviously, and it's happening here in Ireland as well, because we only spoke about it on the show. We spoke to two experts only recently about girls who were in care, particularly girls who were in state care, who were being abused, and some have actually gone missing. We don't even know where they are. Then we know they're still alive somewhere, but they go missing in the system, so to speak. A lot of people sending in some wonderful texts, by the way, Kate, wishing you well. And somebody actually mentioned as well, people should go and see The Sound of Freedom. Actually, it's a good movie to go and see if you want to have a better understanding of trafficking, of course, which is, it talks about trafficking from Mexico into America of young children. But what you really wanted to highlight was, when you think of this kind of thing, don't just think of young children who are very vulnerable at 14 or 15 years of age, but those who are 18 who are also dragged into this world as well. And all I can say is, listening to your story, I empathise completely with you, and I understand exactly what you went through. Well, I don't have the experience, but it sounds harrowing. And I really wish you well, Kate. I know the book, by the way, is called No Way Out, but I don't think that's going to be the title, is it? That's just a working title, is it?
So the No Way Out was published in 2017, but we stopped publishing it in 2020, and I have the rights back to the book. So I'm working on republishing it at the moment with another publisher called Gatecrasher Publishing. And I am hoping for a new title, but we might change it at the moment. But the new title, I think, will be called The Patchwork Girl. So I think that's more befitting to my situation.
Yeah, putting your life together in small pieces, I suppose.
Yeah.
It does. It's a good title. Kate, I wish you well. I'm sorry for what you went through in your life. And hopefully, if any other woman has gone through something similar, hopefully the individuals responsible go to jail for a long, long time. It is one of the worst crimes we could possibly even imagine, particularly as our daughters, sisters, mothers, or whatever it happens to be. We all think about that. So listen, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. I appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll get to talk again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice speaking to you, Niall.
Real people, real opinions.
Real Talk Radio, the multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.